Welcome back, everybody. Hot Mike continues on a busy Thursday. We'll chat some Bison women's basketball stuff coming up here in our second hour. But sources indicate, as we mentioned earlier, that apparently the Super Bowl is being played in a couple days in New Orleans, featuring Kansas City and the Philadelphia Eagles. And we had earlier in the week my conversation with Carson Wentz, and I'm super pumped to have our next guest on. I started bugging him almost a decade ago when it became reality that the Philadelphia Eagles were going to draft Carson Wentz, and he covered every inch of the 5 years that the Bismarck native played with the Eagles. And now, as sports fate would hold, Wentz is back in the Super Bowl and facing the Eagles. Our pleasure to welcome back to our show Les Bowen, who covered the Eagles for so long for the Philly Inquirer, and now even semi-retired, he's still covering the Eagles at the Super Bowl. First off, it's great to see you. How you been?
I've been great, Dom. It's a lot of fun being here. I haven't been to a Super Bowl in like 7 years. It hasn't gotten any easier for the media, but in fact, it's more and more ridiculous. But it's been an interesting week, and I've really enjoyed it.
So the last one you were at, you were freezing your unit one off in Minneapolis.
Yes.
Is that what you're telling me when we were there?
And it's really hot, by the way, in New Orleans.
No kidding.
Even for New Orleans, it's like 80 here.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
So, we had a chance to visit with Carson on Monday. I know you did yesterday, and he's actually done quite a bit of interviews. I was a little surprised by that. I want to go back first to how things ended and how when Jalen Hurts got drafted. I remember I think I had you on my show maybe the day after the draft. Like, wow, what are the Eagles doing here? Remind people of the end, because it was the COVID year. It was such an odd time of what was going on in Philadelphia then.
Yeah, to me, it's a fascinating story, and it's been revisited several times to the point where for some of the Philadelphia media here, I think Carson was kind of a footnote because they covered Carson playing against the Eagles for the Colts and Carson playing against the Eagles for the Commanders. But this is so strange. For this, obviously, he hasn't been back to the Super Bowl since 2018. And here he is finally back, and the Eagles are here too, except they're not together.
Yeah.
And but the end, Carson, the team deteriorated after Super Bowl 52. Talent around him, especially receivers, he didn't have much there. He didn't play as well as he had played. He had more and more injuries. He had a back injury that cost him much of the next season after the knee injury that ended the Super Bowl season. But he got the Eagles into the playoffs in 2019.
Yeah. Yep.
And actually played very well. And that part has kind of gotten lost in Philadelphia lore now that he's, this guy that wanted out and the era was a disappointment. So people kind of elide that, that 2019, he actually played pretty well.
Yeah.
He got them into the playoffs. Second drive of the game, Jadeveon Clowney drives Carson's head into the turf, and Carson has a concussion and has to leave the playoff. The only playoff game he ever played for the Eagles, maybe the only playoff game he's ever played, period, I think.
Yep.
But, so the Eagles came out of that thinking, well, he had a good year, but good Lord, we still we're several years into this and we can't get the guy through a playoff game.
Yep.
And so they drafted Jalen Hurts, and their primary motivation, they got him in the second round. And what they were really thinking, they had a salary cap crunch. They were thinking, instead of paying a veteran backup a lot of money, comparatively, they would get a guy on a rookie contract, have somebody they could develop, and in the back of their mind, a plan B if this guy keeps getting hurt. So what happened was Carson did not take well to that at all, and the team continued to deteriorate around him. I think one of the issues with that draft pick was they could have gotten him a weapon in the second round instead of Jalen Hurts. But Carson had a horrible year in 2020. He got benched. They brought in Hurts. I was talking to Vinnie Curry yesterday, a former Eagle who was on that team. He was a defensive end. And when they benched Carson against the Packers at Lambeau, and Hurts came in and led the team down the field and they won the game. And Vinny said the whole team was kind of like, oh, yeah, well,
Wow.
And after that, Carson took a lot of criticism, some of it valid, but he saw, this is over. I've got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And he forced his way out, even though Nick Sirianni, when he was hired, his initial impulse was to try to bring Carson back and, see it. He didn't, the Eagles didn't really, management didn't know what they had in Hurts. I think a lot of the players kind of did. But management wasn't at all sold on the idea of going forward. They had paid Carson all this money. They were going to have to take what was then the biggest dead cap hit in NFL history,
That's right.
trading him. And they didn't want to do it. But Carson insisted and jumped right into another burning building in Indianapolis. And after that, again, good year, but at the very end,
not good. Yeah.
A disaster. Lost a playoff berth on the last day of the season to a bad team, and Indianapolis got rid of him. And then he went to a really bad Commanders team and had that was not a great situation for him or anybody. And since then, he's a backup for Matt Stafford and Patrick Mahomes. And I'm sure he talked to you about this a little bit, Dom, but he's definitely thinking this is a one-year deal with Kansas City. He's looking to be, Geno Smith, or Sam Darnold, or
Baker Mayfield, right?
Baker Mayfield, and he's a little bit older than Baker or Sam, but he's actually just about the same age Geno Smith was when he resurrected himself in Seattle. So I think his selling point this offseason is, hey, I've had 2 years, haven't taken enough snaps to get hurt. I've learned all this stuff at with two of the great offensive mastermind coaches of the NFL, two of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I'm ready to be somebody's bridge quarterback who takes the job and runs with it. So it's fascinating to me.
I know you asked him yesterday in your story, and I tweeted this out, and you go find it. It's really good about if he's at peace. I was really interested in his response to that. Can you describe that when you asked him that?
Yeah, it was interesting. He was a little more forthcoming than he used to be with us. Am I at peace? Well, I have peace. One of my frustrations in dealing with Carson, and I don't want to offend anyone religion-wise, but everything was always, it's God's will. And you can take that to a point where it's a cop-out, like you're not accepting responsibility for things, and I think has a little bit more mature viewpoint of that now. I think he feels, if he didn't have this faith that somehow, all this was meant to be, he might drive himself crazy because it's been such an unbelievable roller coaster. But I think he's grappling. He admitted, he wrestled with this stuff. It's not like everything happens to you and you're like, oh, okay, guy, I'm fine. And that was good to hear because it was genuine. And there were times when I don't think Carson was very genuine, frankly, during the time that I covered it.
Especially at the end. I got that sense as well. And I think people back here, and he's been dodgy, maybe the best way with the local media back here about over the last 4 years. Frankly, I was surprised Leslie agreed to do the interview with me. We haven't talked in almost 4.5 years. So I was.
Well, I think he's kind of campaigning a little bit here, Dom.
Yeah,
he's got
you might be right. Yeah, I think you're dead on that. Two things before I let you go. How do Philly fans treat him now? I'm looking back. It was the anniversary of the game we were just talking about where he's on the sideline and Nick Foles leads into the Super Bowl. There's a statue of Doug Peterson and Nick Foles outside of the link to this day. What do Philly fans think of him now, 5 years later?
They've turned the page. They've been to 2 more Super Bowls now with Jalen Hurts. They don't really think about him much, and it's a very negative perception, frankly. And I kind of touched on this in the story. It's a little too negative. there were good times, and he did play well more than just that one year. And everything that happened wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
And, you know, it kind of all gets shoved together, I think, and truncated. It's I don't think he didn't really bond with the area. It's very different from where you guys are. It's not, and Philly fans, I think, take a bad rap,
I agree.
but Philly fans want you to be Jason Kelsey. You know,
Yep.
you love us, we'll love you. It's a very, hey, you know, like throw your arms around them sort of thing. And Carson's not that kind of guy. You know, you have to kind of get the vibe of Philly.
Yep.
And if you do, Philly will do anything for you. You know,
Yep.
people get buried in their Brian Dawkins jerseys. You know, I mean, it's not. People on the outside think we all just throw batteries at people and stuff, but that's not
correct.
It's a very deep, visceral connection, and if you can't make that connection, then you know you're not really one of us.
I look at Chris Coast, Fargo guy who was a backup catcher, won a world championship with the
people love
Phillies,
Chris
and they
Coast.
loved him because
Yeah.
Chris embodied. He was Philly. People loved. I remember going to Philly
Yes.
when they won the World Series and going into the stands and talking to people about, and they loved him. They absolutely. He was the Philly model. That was, and it speaks exactly what you're talking about there.
That's exactly right, Dom. Yeah. And I hope he does. You know, it'd be a great story if he goes somewhere and does well. I'd still like to see it. I think he still has ability. I don't know that he can escape. A big part of that 2017 season was him making plays. In fact, Brandon Graham told me it was kind of like watching Mahomes, you know, when he was in his prime, he could just do incredible things back. I don't think he has that anymore, but I think he still has the arm.
Yeah.
And he's still 6'5", and you know, I think he could still help somebody.
Last thing for you, you've covered sports for so long. Is this the ultimate what could have been story in your mind?
For me, it is covering the Eagles. It really is. I mean, there are some others. You know, I had 4 NFC championship games with Andy Reid that they didn't win, and 1 Super Bowl that they almost won with Andy Reid. But yeah, to me, as far as a player, well, you know what, Dom? Now that I think about it, before I covered the Eagles, I covered the Flyers. I covered the whole Eric Lindros.
Oh, Eric Lindros, yeah. That's another one. Yep.
Same deal.
Yep.
You know?
That's exactly right. It's exactly right.
But yeah, it's really interesting to me, and I still can't quite. It's still fresh to me, I guess.
It's fresh for a lot of people here as well. It's great to see you, bud. Glad you're doing so well. Have a great time at the game and be well, okay?
Thank you very much, Dom. Take care.
Les Bowen, Philly Sports, right there. And I tweeted out the link to his story that he interviewed with Carson yesterday. It's really good stuff, and off of our conversation we had on Monday. We're overdue for a break. We got to get back on schedule here. That was great stuff, though. We'll break here. We come back. Second hour on tap. Jory Collins joining us. Coming up, talk some Bison women's basketball. We'll break now. Hour 2 coming up.